next session, you're going to hear from Dr. Judy Hughey, who is a national certified counselor and has been on faculty at Kansas State University for many years. She's an associate professor and coordinator of the clinical director of counselor education program, but she just retired, and I know that that's also an exciting time for her as she's going to get to be spending some time with her new grandbaby. And I'm really excited to have Dr. Hughey present today, and her session is going to be a little tough to hear, and she tells you at the beginning that there's a bit of a trigger warning, and she's talking about a difficult subject, but we have been through difficult times these last couple years, and even prior to the pandemic, administrators from schools all over the country were sharing that they were seeing more anxiety and trauma in students than they had in their entire career in the couple years leading up to the pandemic. So mental health is an issue that we just need to talk about more in our society, and it's an issue that we need to talk about more in education. So Dr. Hughey's session is going to call attention to a topic that we have got to be more comfortable talking about. And she's going to present this information in a very knowledgeable way. She's an academic scholar in this field. She is the person that school counselors all over the state of Kansas call when they have an issue in their school that they're really needing advice on. Dr. Hughey has won awards. She has spoken all over the country, and she is just really someone that in my career, and especially these last 8 years and the 6 years I was on faculty at Kansas State University, she's someone that really spoke to me in her word and deed. I admired her, I respected her, and I'm eager for you to hear from her today. She has a very amazing documentary film coming up called Becoming Trauma Responsive. It was filmed, and she's one of the co-directors of it. It was produced by Kansas State University College of Education and Dean Debbie Mercer. And the K-State College of Ed is just on the cutting edge of providing really needed resources in the field of education. And this documentary, Becoming Trauma Responsive, has been picked up by PBS and is going to air on many PBS stations this fall. And I will drop a link for the documentary film and the website at K-State in the chat bar, so in the comments, so that you can see that. And Dr. Hughey also wrote a chapter in my book, which is available free on the internet. The name of my book is Journey to Refuge, and I'll drop a link for that as well. Her chapter on trauma was just so enlightening for me. I learned so much when editing it for the book. The title of her chapter is Globalization of Trauma and the Impact on Education, Trauma, Brain Development, and Strategies. I know that this is going to be a tough session for probably all of us, but it's going to be powerful, and you're going to get a new focus on how to deal with some of your struggling students and colleagues, and maybe even yourself. So thank you, Dr. Judy Hughey, for being our guest educator for this third annual Camp OATK12.
Good morning. I'm honored to be with you this morning and to share with you a little bit about a topic that is very dear to my heart, and I know is very dear to many hearts in our country, to many individuals who have been shocked and disheartened to see what has happened over the last few years, and particularly over the last few weeks in our country with the mass shootings, the tragedies that have impacted all of us to our core. I want to talk about mental health, mental wellness, that has impacted us in so many different ways in our communities, in our schools, in our classrooms, with our students, with our families, and with our teachers, with our counselors, with every educator, with every parent. Again, this is a passion of mine. I've been in this business for a very long time, uh, about 45 years, and been at Kansas State for 32 years, and just retired. So I want to thank you for the invitation to get to speak with you about this very important topic, perhaps as important now as it has ever been. And one of the reasons for that is the need to remove the stigma about talking about mental wellness. And I want to focus on mental wellness because truly this is a matter of wellness for all of us. And the more that we can talk about it in that way and normalize it, normalize the idea that we all have those really good days and those days that are not as good. And so we're looking at mental wellness on a continuum. And it is when it gets to that end of the continuum and it stays there, and we know we need help, or we recognize that within a student. What do we do? How do we recognize it? What are the factors that we as educators need to recognize, and how do we address it? It can be frightening, no doubt about it. And there's a level of knowledge and confidence within ourselves and advocacy, I think, that is critical. And so those are some of the issues that I'm going to talk about. I also want to give you a heads up that I am going to talk about some sensitive issues, a sensitive issue, death by suicide. And I know that for many, that hits very close to home. It does for me. The husband of one of my best friends died by suicide, very successful orthopedic surgeon. The child of a friend has died by suicide. And again, as a counselor educator and as a counselor, this is a topic that we deal with pretty much on a daily basis, suicidal ideation. So I always, when I present, give a heads up about that. I am going to be talking about that some. It's not the primary topic of this discussion, but it is part of the topic. And so the discussion. And so I want to give you a heads up about that. Mental health was an issue before the pandemic, and we all know that. We saw it escalating prior to the pandemic. But then the pandemic and everything that came with it just exacerbated the issue. So I'm going to share with you a PowerPoint. And on Zoom, this is can be a little tricky. So bear with me just a minute. Okay. And I'm not going to read you every PowerPoint, and I'm certainly not going to, I don't know, with my students, I call it death by PowerPoint. I'm not going to do that. But I just, because I think we all learn in different ways. And so, so that you have some visuals other than my face and my voice, I want to show you some visuals. So let me share with you that the students that you have in your classroom are going to present in different ways. And honestly, some of them are going to present as if everything is just fine. They are going to present and what we call masking, like they don't have a problem in the world, as a matter of fact. You're going to say, how are things today? How is everything going? And their answers, fine, great, when in fact, not so much, not so much. Recognizing, being able to see what's behind the mask. And I want to say too, when I'm talking about what's going on with our students, I invite you to think about yourself as well, because we all have masked pretty well too. You might even say that, how many times have you said everything's fine when you are torn up inside? How often do you mask? And I would invite you to think about how exhausting masking is. It's exhausting for you. It's exhausting for your students. And we know that when we are exhausted, we don't make our best decisions. That's not when we make our best behavioral choices either. That's true for us, and it is true for our students. So during the pandemic in the classroom, I saw this quote and I had to laugh because I thought, not just first graders, but how many times in a meeting, university colleagues, you haven't lived until you've heard a group of first graders shouting, mute yourself, or I can't hear you, unmute yourself. That just became part of our lexicon. So much changed during the pandemic. How we communicate with one another, or how we don't communicate with one another, which seriously then impacts our mental health, communication, our level of anxiety, what we find annoys us, how we share our feelings, our thoughts, our words. And then I found this, being able to laugh. So the mother, yes, talking to her this was a 2-year-old. Yes, you were in my belly. And the 3-year-old, excuse me. Why? With tears in her eyes. Why did you eat me? Again, not quite understanding the big picture, not quite that accurate communication that we all seek and want with individuals that we're trying to make connections with, but we're not quite at the same level. We're not quite at the same knowledge base or skill level. And so it might not be this conversation, but it might be, in fact, the same idea. We're just not communicating. We know that the status of mental health or wellness during the last few years has just gone downhill. So this survey of working parents and teachers and other working parents reported, and this has been reported in different empirical studies, 54% sought professional help because of their concern over emotional health and development or behavior of their children. Think about that, 54%. 72% continue to be connected to a professional for those concerns. And you can read through. Again, I'm not going to read everything on the slides to you, but the last one, 78% believe mental health challenges in children have increased in recent years. To me, the positive side of that is we finally have an awakening in our communities that, yes, mental health is at epidemic proportions. We know that teen suicide is at an epidemic proportion. And I'll talk in a little bit. It's not just teen, it's not just adolescent. Not a week goes by in my business that I don't have a counselor calling me, or I don't have a counselor with a client at the elementary level that is saying, I want to die and I have a plan. It's not just teens. It's not just those that we think, oh, those are other kids. Those are kids that have, from another part of town, or all SES, all racial, religions, ethnic. It crosses, it doesn't discriminate. Suicidal ideation, mental health challenges, they do not discriminate. They touch every human being. And I think that's, again, that's part of that stigma we have to get over. Also note, 44% of those surveyed, and this was a huge survey, felt persistently sad or hopeless during the last year. Again, think about behaviors associated with feeling persistently sad or hopeless. This is not just having a bad day, but persistently sad or hopeless. Kind of rips your heart, doesn't it? And these are students that have been sitting in your classroom. These are parents that you've been visiting with, that have been calling you, that perhaps have been not so happy, angry, maybe, wanting somebody to blame. Examples of stressors, and this is, financial concerns, that feeling of isolation. And do I mask or do I not mask? Is it helping or not helping? We hear from the news media, one thing, and then we change the station and we hear the opposite. And one day we hear this, and the next day we hear that. And then, schools are in session one day, and the next day they're remote, and teachers are told, be ready, to change at a minute's notice. Right. Like, we can do that. Just flip on a dime. A little easier said than done. And then on top of that, all dealing with grief and loss every day. Excuse me. The television telling us how many individuals have passed away from COVID, how many are in the hospital. And if you're a child sitting there listening to this, or if you're a child who has lost a parent or a grandparent or a cousin, or someone is in the hospital, the fear that goes along with that. How do we deal with grief? We as adults often don't deal with grief very well. And a child having to deal with grief and loss. And it's not just death, but the loss of ritual, graduations, friendships, people that up and moved because they didn't have to live in a particular place. They could go to live with other family members, or work remote, or whatever. The loss of income, the loss of just good health. And perhaps most importantly, or as importantly, the loss of hope. Fear can be so overwhelming for adults. But again, thinking about the impact on students, and then we wonder why we have this huge issue with anxiety. We wonder why we have students with huge mental health issues that are looking to solve issues with guns. What a tragedy, because perhaps they don't have healthy coping skills. They don't have the resilience. They don't have hope that the issues that they're dealing with at this present moment are temporary. We can teach resilience. We can teach hope. We can instill hope. We have that ability to address anxiety, to address depression. It can be temporary. We must send that message. We must recognize this huge number of individuals today, that adults and students, I want to be clear, that are suffering from anxiety, depression, and or both, and they're different. I've had many clients describe it to me as being in the bottom of a black hole and looking up and seeing nothing but black and no way out. And the pain being so intense that that's when they feel it's actually a blessing to relieve their family members and their friends of their existence. And that's when we have to recognize that, when we see that in others, and act, and not be afraid to act. And again, all ages. The pandemic exacerbated depression and anxiety. And we have a society now on meds, which is a good thing, as long as meds are working as a motivator to get individuals to other kinds of help too. Just taking a pill is not the answer, but taking a pill is a great way to get started with addressing, taking the right kind of med. Let me be clear about that, not just taking any pill, but taking the right kind of medication prescribed by your physician, along with therapy, along with exercise, along with other kinds of self-help and coping skills, learning resilience. And we know that starting early on is key. I call it, and I'll talk about this in a few minutes, but womb to tomb kinds of skills. Again, let me emphasize, it is not about income. It's easy for us to say or to think to ourselves, well, if I only had $1 million, or if I only had a huge raise, I wouldn't have these stressors. But not so much. Individuals of all income levels, all SES, all race, all colors, all ethnic backgrounds suffer from anxiety, depression, stress. It doesn't discriminate. And gender. So as we look at what the pandemic brought us, the technology, and some would say, oh, that was my huge stressor. And it was for many of us. We had to do that flip on a dime. And I saw this and I thought, yeah, I can relate. The quote, I was having problems with my work computer, so I called my IT guy, and he was like, you really have to stop calling me when I'm at school, Mom. Many of us teachers, were told, okay, we're going to go online. And so it was at Kansas State, I will say that we'd been teaching online in our programs and in our department for several years. And so we were a few steps ahead of some of our colleagues. But for many, this was a brand new world. And consequently, we've seen, unfortunately, a lot of resignations and a lot of frustration because of the remote learning. And in many cases, our students were ahead of us. I know that at one point I did call one of my kids, my oldest son, and ask a question about, I don't know, some application or something. And his response to me was, "That's pretty basic, Mom." Well, okay, I won't be calling you anymore. So yeah. This work from home, dealing with new technology, and worrying about our children. What's going on with their health? For some parents, that just put them over the top. It just put them over the top. Children and work interruption. And even for parents who thought they had it all together. There's a reason that not everybody went into teaching. It's a gift. Let's be real. Being able to teach in a classroom is a gift. It's a skill. It's a learned art. Not everybody is given that gift. Just like other gifts, not everybody is given those gifts. Consequently, being challenged with that task and with the task of their own job and everything else going on in the pandemic just led some people to the ledge. And they were very honest in sharing that. And then worrying about their children's mental health, even when then they return to school or the parent returned to work. And I can't tell you how many times I received or my counselors received calls like, "I can't get my child out of bed. I don't know what to do. My kid won't get up. My kid won't go to school today. My kid wants to just sleep or do games all day, video games all day." I can't tell you how many times we got that phone call. And now what's happening is we're getting calls constantly that kids have kind of gotten used to staying at home, having received a lot of grace, and getting them motivated again to actually increase their work ethic is a huge challenge. We also have students that we can't find. We have no idea where they are. We've got some concerns. And we know that what went on in the homes is of different levels. Some parents did an awesome job, incredible jobs of teaching and great learning in the home. And others, not as much. They tried, but not quite as successful. I had to laugh when I read this one. "My kids are wrestling in the room, letting loose blood-curdling screams every 5 minutes. My 9-year-old refuses to do any reading. My 4-year-old wants food we don't have. And the best I can offer is a 15-minute dance party in between work calls. Blank you and your color-coded homeschool schedules." I think that could represent a lot of individuals' thoughts when they see on social media, "Oh, what a great job some parents are doing." Again, I won't read this to you, but it certainly represents the anxiety that so many have felt. So again, just quickly, I want to point out how many students felt incredible mental health challenges and how that led to behavioral issues. behavioral issues don't just happen because children wake up and decide, I'm gonna be a little, however, whatever word you want to put in there today. I'm gonna do something rotten or mean. Things lead up to that. There's something going on with that student. There's something going on. And often it's about anger. It is about feeling powerless over their life. Maybe it's about bullying or a rage that they feel over something happening in the home, or how they're being treated, or they perceive that they are being treated in school. Maybe no one has asked them what's going on in their life. And again, we know that over the last couple of years, children, and this is true for adults too, have not received adequate sleep. They're feeling depressed and unhappy, a loss of confidence in themselves. So again, I ask you to think about what happens in your own life when you feel that way. What's the impact on your own decision making? The same is going to be true for your students. Death by suicide is the second leading cause of death. Second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 14. And the 10th leading cause of death for ages 5 to 9. 5 to 9. It breaks my heart to tell you that, in fact, we've had students die by suicide inside schools, and you may have experienced that in your own school. You can read that. Heartbreaking, heartbreaking. I mentioned earlier how many jobs.
Take this job and shove it. I ain't working here.
We know that people changed jobs. I don't have time to talk about that a lot. But again, I want to mention it just because change, the whole idea of change, has impacted us. And so as we think about social emotional learning and how we deal with change, how is it that we teach children healthy coping skills, emotional regulation? How is it that we're able to roll with change and stay well, to self-discover, to know that there's so much in this world to be grateful for, how to laugh, how to grow from our own mistakes? That's all part of social emotional learning. I think about it as from womb to tomb, because we evolve. We have to keep growing and learning in the social emotional domain. It's gotten a bad rap from politicians. I'm not going to get political, but social emotional learning in a classroom is a good thing. It enhances academics. It enhances academics, because when we talk about wellness and how to relieve those are life skills, how to relieve our own stress, how to engage in mindfulness, how to focus and self-regulate and recognize our triggers. Those are life skills, and they need to begin womb to tomb, womb to tomb. The benefits are everywhere. I know that you know those. I won't go through those again, and I think I'm out of time. So I want to end with this. If you know someone who is struggling, please share with them resources. Do not be afraid to ever ask important questions. Share with them resources. Share with them resources. I appreciate this time with you. Thank you. Thank you. Always welcome to contact me. I'd be happy to visit with anyone at any time. And I hope that you have a wonderful conference and a wonderful summer. Please engage in self-care. You so deserve it. Thank you.